where governance meets growth. So I'm Katherine Ng, founder of Katashe Solutions and Secretary General at Access. Over the past decade, I've worked across finance, technology, and mission-driven ecosystems, helping scale startups across APAC while building for public good. KatKast is where we explore real mechanics of innovation, from DAO governance, staking policy, to financial inclusion, on-chain education, and the future of finance. So if you care about how systems scale and who they serve, you're in the right place. So let's dive in. So I'm going to welcome my guests now.
Hello.
All right. Welcome to my guests of the day. Today, I'm speaking with a very special guest whom I've known for years now and whose work has crossed paths with mine at several stages of my own journey in digital assets. So my guest is Dan Liebau. Please tell me I pronounced it properly.
Yes, you did. And many people don't, so I appreciate it. There's all sorts of different versions, so you did it well.
Okay, thanks, Dan. So Dan is the founder of Lightbulb Capital in Hong Kong and Singapore. So before that, he was the Chief Investment Officer of the modular blockchain fund at Modular Asset Management. He's also served as the Chief Operating Officer of HSBC Securities in Singapore. And on the academic side, he lectures at APAC in the Masters in Finance program and previously taught blockchain and digital assets at SMU and IE Business School. So Dan is also an academic. His research has been published by Springer and MIT Press, and he's completing his PhD in finance at Erasmus University. So Dan and I first connected years ago while I was working in a regulated crypto exchange in 2018 during my CFI days. We stayed in touch through my time at Tezos and later Katashe over the years. And it's been very interesting to watch how our work has evolved in parallel across this region. So Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited. We've been planning for this for a while, so it's good to make it happen.
Yes. So then first question of the day, how did your Pracademic journey come together for you, using your term Pracademic, of course, and what sparked your interest across these two different parts of the industry?
Yeah. So Pracademic, right? The mix of practitioner and academic. When I speak to academics, I will always introduce myself as the person who, started their career the wrong way around. Because usually what they do is they go to school and then they do their PhD and then they research and maybe later they end up in the industry or maybe not. And then for me, the journey was kind of the other way around. I was really not very good at school for most of my school days. It was a disaster, really. And so when I had an opportunity to start and go and work, I did that as quickly as possible. And spent about 15 years in different financial services companies. And then I discovered my love to classroom and teaching and research and so on relatively late in my life. And here we are. Now I've become a bit of a mix of both, right? And I very much enjoy the whole research part, but I also like to stay abreast with what the industry is doing. So the mix of being a academic, I think, is quite cool.
Yeah, in fact, like your path has actually inspired me in some ways to also explore the academic route, which led to my involvement with engaging the Institute of Policy Studies, leading to my appointment as an adjunct research fellow. So thanks, Dan, for the inspiration. So moving on to your upcoming new book launch, which you shared with me, last month. It's a book co-written by you and Professor Simon Trimborn, launching January 2026, which distills blockchain's most important dimensions for busy executives. And it's a position as a resource for practitioners. So it takes the entire blockchain ecosystem and then organizes it into 4 very practical pillars. But can you share, what do you mean by practitioners? Like, who is this book really meant for, and what made you want to write for them?
Yeah, so let me tell you the kind of the story of the book and how it came about. So not unlike you, I, at one point in time in my life, thought it would be cool to have a podcast. So I created a podcast. And at the time, it was called the Blockchain Scholars Podcast. And the idea was really this. Many research scholars have an awful lot of very useful insights that they publish in their articles. But the articles are often quite long, like 40 pages, and sometimes also very technical. So for the sort of busy practitioner, it's a little bit difficult to read and to find the time as well.
Agreed.
And so you've got that on the one side, paired with perhaps not the most attention paid to how to do videos and podcasting in a proper way, right? So most people would just say, "Oh, hey, you student, go to the back and record my lecture with the iPhone, and then we put it online." And of course, the quality is not so great. On the other hand, you do have an awful lot of content on crypto and blockchain on YouTube and all these other platforms, but sometimes the content's a bit weak. It's like a lot of rah-rah, a lot of shilling. So not so useful, really, right? If you're a senior executive and you're trying to understand what's happening, maybe that is almost counterproductive. So I thought I put these two things together. Try to record a nice podcast and then get these super scholars to basically come to my show and explain in 15 minutes what their insights actually mean for practitioners. I did that for a year, and then I ran out of funding, unfortunately. But I still thought, the idea is actually useful. So when I was in Amsterdam, over a year ago, I spoke to Simon, my friend, and he's the, my co-editor. And we thought, why don't we take the same idea and then we just put it into a book? So that's what the book really is. It's a collaboration of many scholars. I think we have 24, 25 that each wrote a 1,250-word summary of their actual article with the practitioner in mind. So they present what they found out, and then they also conclude with saying what it actually means for a practitioner, what they found out. Right? So hopefully very useful. We've got a long list of, I don't want to point anyone out in specifically, but I thought might as well try and aim high, right? So I called the best people in the world, and many of them said, yeah, I'll do it. So we're really blessed that we have so many really high profile scholars contributing to the book. You can think of Simon as me as more like the organizers of this thing. I mean, yes, we wrote a little bit here and there, a few chapters, but mainly it's really all of these contributions of these excellent scholars that make up the book. And we structured it in, as you said, in 4 sort of sections. One is really about tokenomics and digital platforms. So this is more like the basics. Then we have a section that's split into 2, which we call markets. So there's a part on centralized markets, a part on decentralized markets. Yeah. And then we have other 2 emerging topics that I think are very important. One is privacy. And it's kind of interesting right now, privacy, everyone talks about it. When we started pulling together the content for the book, it was not the case. So it's kind of nice to see. And then the last one, of course, would be probably most interesting to you, which is all around DAOs, right? So we have a few DAO scholars that contributed to that section. So yeah, all in all, very much looking forward to launching. We're planning mid-Jan. We've got some events lined up in Hong Kong, in Shenzhen, in Amsterdam as well. So should be good.
Hey, book launch. It's like a book tour.
Yeah, should be good.
Awesome, fantastic, congratulations. But just without giving too much away, I just wanted to like canvas at a very high level, like the 4 pillars that you mentioned, right? Starting with tokenomics. Where do you see like the biggest misunderstanding in the industry around token economics and like digital platforms, for example?
Yeah. And I'll just pick out one random thing that I think is quite important and quite fundamental. When people talk about emerging technologies, blockchain perhaps being one of them, often they think about how can we do things faster, cheaper, better. But then the blockchain is actually not designed for that. So we've got one article that basically describes what's the value proposition of a blockchain, and it turns out there's like cost of verification that can be managed down, and then suddenly you realize, oh, this is a device that is maybe not a faster, cheaper, better type of a device like machine learning or some of these other technologies, but it's is really solving some other problem, right? And so I obviously would invite everyone to read that carefully and then try to not misuse the blockchain, because that maybe ends up going wrong.
Yeah, and it speaks to that heart of the systems design, whether it's centralized versus decentralized, and you canvas it in the market section. And what do you think what do you think is the biggest narrative right now in market structure that people are not paying enough attention to, that should encourage them to read the book?
Well, I mean, I think so there's a convergence, I think, between two things, right? So you've got all of these primitives around decentralized finance, for example. The automated market makers kind of being one big phenomenon to kind of swap tokens for each other. And then you have this whole topic of tokenization, right? And how maybe all of the different assets, whether it's securities or other type of, I think they call it real world assets, even though I don't like the term so much because that also stands for something else in finance. But so you have these two things, right? And then you put them together, then you realize, oh, maybe in the future, lots of markets will actually function in the DeFi way. And I think that's maybe a little bit difficult to grasp for people in regular finance, because, and I include myself happily here, once you've seen an order book, it's very hard to get the idea out of your head, and then you ask yourself, no, but trading can only be done or organized in that way. But then here we go, we've got automated market makers, and they work, and people trade over them billions of dollars every day. So I think that's one interesting thing that perhaps might not be so obvious if you sit in a regular fund management house or in a bank. And so I think we have more than one chapter actually discussing these automated market makers, how they function, also what kind of risks they come with. So that should be interesting as an example in the market space.
Yeah, and when it comes to real world adoption, real world adoption, you did share a little bit about privacy preservation. And I'm just curious to know your thoughts on how regulated institutions should think about privacy architecture in a way that's often overlooked.
Yes. I mean, if you, I think I've said this many times, when you think about anything that has to do with privacy preservation in the crypto sphere, the first thing everyone thinks about is money laundering, right? Because obviously, this is a technology that allows you to move funds in an anonymous way. That's perfect for all the crooks in the world, right? And that's true.
Right, yes.
Let's not kid ourselves. But if you think about how transparent the current blockchains are, you and I could literally, inspect the Ethereum blockchain, and with a little bit of data science, we could probably infer who controls which wallet. We could identify these individuals, maybe find out where they live, and abduct their children. I mean, it's quite a serious, if you think about it, it's quite a serious problem. I don't want anyone to know how much money I have in a wallet. And yet, even though it's great for research because we can pull all the data, it's not very secure for the user, especially if they have accumulated some wealth, right? Because it exposes them to these risks. So I think there's a reason why systems in finance, in traditional finance, actually preserve the privacy to some extent in these things, and not as open book as maybe in the crypto sphere. So I think we have to move from, it's just something that is valuable for crooked people, to something that is perhaps very needed in this perhaps modern finance 2.0 version of the whole ecosystem, where blockchains plays a bigger role. And so we spent a little bit of time in the privacy section on that as well, and I hope that that's also useful to understand the sort of key cryptographic primitives as well that enable privacy, but then at the same time don't interfere with compliance, which I think is the key sort of objective there.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Like you've touched on a very interesting inflection point where, because of all this on-chain data, it's given rise to a whole new industry in blockchain intelligence and transaction monitoring, which also then gives rise to how do we govern this type of blockchain intelligence and technology, and that then brings us to the chapter on DAOs, right? Like and that people are still kind of grappling with how to really set guardrails, really. So what do you think should be a key reality or risk that practitioners should keep in mind as this space in DAOs continue to evolve?
I mean, I got a whole other book about that, which is the one that discusses how financial services industry can actually interact with DAOs. And in there, we basically highlight that there are some idiosyncratic risks that you should be aware of if you're dealing with a DAO, right? So, for example, there's this thing called governance risk. There are a whole bunch. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other risks. I would also encourage, obviously, everyone to look at my other book. But some of the key things that are important to understand here is that a DAO is not, by definition, a legal entity that you can sue. So you have to be a little bit more careful on how to interact with it and understand the key risks. One of them, obviously, being that the DAO gets abandoned. It's a real risk. Imagine you finally come around as a bank and you say, okay, I'm gonna offer my clients access to a DeFi lending platform, right? And you do your due diligence and you do your best job, and then eventually there is some DAO issue. People don't get along and they go, screw this project, we're not doing it anymore. So then what are you going to do as a financial institution, right? So these things are worth thinking about. Not all of the questions have answers, but I think to kind of go in with two eyes open and be aware of the risks that we outline and define in the book are quite important.
Yeah, please do share the link to your other book as well, so I can add it in the show notes later. And fantastic. And on this theme of contributions from scholars and tracing your history back to launching Blockchain Scholars podcast, to like giving lectures on blockchain. Recently, you were invited by Zhejiang University International Business School in China. It's one of the top universities there, to speak at the Financial Street Forum in Beijing, which is a state-level conference jointly organized by the People's Bank of China, China Securities Regulatory Commission, the China Banking and Insurance Regulatory Commission, and the Beijing municipal government, which gave you a close look at how China is thinking about AI and financial infrastructure. So I saw your reflection on LinkedIn, and I really thought it was very interesting because you highlighted how advanced and practical the ecosystem development in China has become. And I would love to unpack some of that insights with you. So when you were in Beijing, what really stood out to you the most about the current state of China's financial technology ecosystem, especially in relation to AI too?
So, I mean, let's start with some physical kind of details.
Yeah.
The building that the event venue, right, is in this skyscraper, and the skyscraper name has Fintech in it. I mean, to me, that is, is maybe a small detail, but maybe it's not so small, because in a way it's quite fascinating that it's that high on the agenda, right? And if you look at other countries where fintech congregates, I don't know. I mean, in Singapore we have Block 71, very far away from everything. Like, this thing is in the middle of Beijing, is a skyscraper, and it has fintech in it. So I think that was impressive.
Yeah.
Another thing that I thought was quite interesting is that the government officials are very involved and interested. And if you run one of the districts in Beijing, you probably have a gazillion other things to worry about, and you don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, what can we do with emerging technologies in finance? But they show presence, and they spend time, and they give an opening keynote and so on. So I thought that was also very fascinating. How open all the sort of senior speakers were when it comes to blockchain technology was a bit surprising to me. Because when you don't spend time in China, you think, oh, well, Bitcoin's banned, so how much are they going to do with it? Probably not much, right? Except for maybe trying to find people who still use Bitcoin and then put them into jail. But then surprisingly curious, open kind of dialogue about how to use blockchain in the future of finance, right? Whether it is as sort of payment rails internationally as well, whether it is to do with, again, tokenization and real-world assets. There was even one presenter, I thought he did the best presentation. I can't remember his name, but he basically spoke about stable coins quite a bit. And, it's very kind of moderate view. So it's really focusing on, like we like to say in the crypto world, focus on utility and what you can do with the technology, rather than just speculating and making a lot of money. So focus, for example, on the stablecoin issuers. Okay, how can we use this to reimagine how payments work, and not just to make money by starting a stablecoin company. So it's very it was very encouraging, actually.
Yeah, wow, it's fantastic.
Some other small details, of course, not of course, but unfortunately I don't speak Chinese. So I thought, will I even understand anything that's going on, right? So they have real-time AI-powered translation. And at the beginning I thought, oh, maybe it's recorded, right? Because of course the speeches are sort of very well prepared. At this senior level, people kind of pay attention word for word what they say. But no, because I realized the AI translation, which came out on a big screen, sometimes it was faster, sometimes it was slower, right? Because it's following the speaker's sort of pace. And I mean, these are just small details where it also shows you how advanced the ecosystem is, even with these kind of logistics type of technologies. Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. I'm actually really surprised to hear that China has adopted a moderate view to blockchain technology, and that they are actually open to public-private partnerships internationally as well.
I mean, if you read the new 5-year plan sort of summary, right, that the words digital finance and internationalization feature quite prominently. And this is also kind of an interesting thing for the International Business School in Zhejiang, because eventually their mission is also to engage with students and scholars around the world, right? And so it's a very interesting sort of position that they've put themselves in there. And yeah, thank you, Ben Shengling, for the invitation. It was a really, really great event.
Fantastic. I'm curious to know, like, how do you see academic institutions like Zhejiang Business School enable innovation as China moves into its 5-year roadmap for digital finance? Like, do you see them as more of like a neutral convener, welcoming academic contributions for their journals? How do you see them, participating?
I mean, I think they have a few huge opportunities, right? So one is, of course, to attract students from all over the world to also, spend time in China. I mean, I actually spent some time on the campus in Haining, which again blew my mind. It was the smallest of 6, I think, that the university has, but it's beautiful. It has a little lake.
Wow.
Very, very nicely designed. And I think, to bring international students and scholars to China to kind of learn more about the progress that has been made there is probably one thing that they can do. But let's not forget as well that Zhejiang province is where Alibaba headquarters is, right? And so Ant Financial is there. And with that, you have an incredible data source that I think probably many researchers around the world will probably be quite keen to exploit. And I mean, Ant Financial is just one example, but I think there's a lot of research opportunities that you could exploit by also investigating how things work in China, right? Because right now, whether we like it or not, I mean, a lot of the sort of finance and econ research is very much focused on the US, maybe a little bit on Europe, but now you have this kind of other source of data that could also highlight how perhaps cultural differences affect some of these economic dynamics. So I think that's also very exciting.
Yeah, this really just came to my mind, like the whole evolution of the super app, right? Which Grab is trying to emulate here, or Shopee or Lazada. It's like they want to pack as many features as possible, make it look very, very busy. Whereas in the US, the consumer apps tend to look very clean.
I think that has to do with I think, I mean, I'm not an expert in this, but I think that has to do with the cultural preference.
Yeah.
So to me, as when I'm in China, I use all these apps as well, but I find it overwhelming. I mean, not only don't I speak the language, there's so many different icons and things to choose from. I find it very complicated. I prefer the US style, Apple type of design, very simple, nothing can go wrong. But then in China, that's how people prefer it, right? And the internet effectively doesn't happen in the web browser. I mean, that's kind of one thing that also is important to understand. It's all about mini programs, whether it is in Ant or whether it's in WeChat, right? Which is, again, you have to get used to it, but that's how internet really works in China.
Yeah, the mini app feature is, I do see Western projects actually starting to adopt this kind of feature, like World App, for example, as a mini app type of layouts. And I feel like even Uniswap with their new wallet app has similar features. And which brings us to this segment where we talk about DAO governance in detail. Dan, you did co-author a deep research paper that uses Uniswap as a laboratory for understanding how voting delegation really works. So this became more interesting with the recent unification proposal by their founder Hayden, because it reminds everyone that founder influence and delegate networks still play a major role. So when you you did the data analysis, like what the data revealed in your study, where you examined millions and millions of on-chain and off-chain observations, like when you looked at the patterns in that data, what did you really find about delegate behavior that the industry often misunderstands or overlooks?
Yeah, I mean, maybe let me start to say with, I learned a lot during this research project with my co-authors, Dion and Thomas and Peter, also on the sort of data analysis side, because in the beginning we had a rather limited data set, and then when we shared it with I think a conference, they said, well, nowadays it's so easy to get all the data, just go to the blockchain. And so we ended up having something like 32 million observations that we had to analyze. So suddenly even the sort of simplest task, like creating a descriptive statistics table or running like a simple regression, could take quite a long time. But basically what we investigate in this paper is to understand a little bit what drives vote delegation, right? Because in systems like Uniswap, you have the ability to delegate your vote to another wallet. I mean, you can delegate it to your own wallet, but you can also delegate it to somebody else if you feel like you're not, you don't have time, or you think somebody else is more qualified. You can take that vote delegation decision. So what we were interested in is to understand, okay, how do people decide who to delegate to and how to take this decision? So the first sort of idea was that, well, if somebody has a lot of voting power, then maybe I want to delegate to them as well, because clearly if they have a lot, they have skin in the game, right? So if they take a wrong decision or influence a decision in the wrong way, then they lose. So they have an interest to not take the wrong decision. So we validated that with the data, and it turns out it's a little bit counterintuitive that is not the case. So a sort of additional 1% increase in own tokens is associated with a 1.5 or 1.6 percentage points less delegated votes. So how do you interpret that? Well, maybe it means that actually the community values decentralization over this whole skin in the game idea, right? That's possible. Because of course, if you delegate votes to somebody who has less, then you don't have that vote concentration that maybe some people are afraid of. Then we looked at, what's the role of these early investors? And then, of course, one of the very prominent investors is the A16Z, and they also play a very important role, not only because they also own a very large amount of unit tokens, but also because they created a network of delegates around them. Many of them are these blockchain clubs from the different Ivy League universities,
Yeah.
And so we did this analysis where we thought, okay, if you are part of this club, right, of this delegate network, do you then get more votes delegated to yourself or not? And it turns out that that is absolutely the case, and by a very, very high margin. So what do you make of that? Well, basically, it looks decentralized because you don't have a single person calling all the shots, but then also you have a very small group of people who have the ability to influence these governance decisions, right? And we thought that was also kind of interesting to see, and also important for anyone who uses Uniswap or engages with them to understand that is not completely decentralized. Right? It's probably still better than some of the very centrally run companies. Also because people have the option to go and buy uni tokens and build up their stake and then become a more important kind of player. But in the data that we had, I mean, it's very prevalent that these A16Z affiliates really call the shots.
That's so interesting. Like when you mentioned how proposals involve major protocol decisions, for example, we see this voting blocks that you mentioned, right? Form. And like for example, A16Z being a major uni token holder, and then enabling delegation through these Ivy League blockchain clubs. So from your perspective, what do you think drives these patterns? Like the way I see it, it's actually a convergence of financial capital and social capital, and blockchain intelligence actually enabling that identification of patterns to emerge. But I would love your view. Like, do you think it's reliance of information, like, okay, I trust this person, so you have social coordination happening there, or do you think there's something happening inside this new governance structure within DAOs? Yeah.
I mean, I come back to the third sort of finding that also speaks to what else drives these vote delegations in a second. But I think to answer your question directly, eventually, if you start a new protocol and you don't have concentration of power, it's very hard to make any progress, right? Because decisions take longer the more people get involved. So if you're a tech startup of sorts, whether Web 2 or Web 3, it's probably good if in the early stages, few people call the shots, because then you can move very quickly, and that's what counts in the world of startups. So I think there's some motivation around that, and also kind of retaining control. Maybe you still look quite decentralized, but then you actually retain quite a lot of control, right? So that's kind of one thing. But then expanding on the sort of third finding, which has nothing to do with these concentration dynamics, we also looked at, well, can people build some sort of reputation, and then that reputation attracts additional votes to be delegated? And it turns out that if you were a proposer before, a governance vote proposer, if that makes sense, then you start building your reputation, right? And other people see, oh, you're not just somebody who votes, but somebody who also comes up with new ideas and so on. And so there is a sort of significant association with whether you've been a proposer or not. But then also, we went one level deeper and said, okay, is there a difference between people who actually got their proposal through, right? Because there's a whole, as you would know, as a governance specialist, there's a whole process where you have a different check stages, and then you have the on-chain vote in the end. So turns out that those wallets who were successful proposers attract even more, right? So you have this reputation kind of association with vote delegation.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and I find that creating proposals, a very strong one, actually takes a lot of research into the ecosystem and the protocol growth mechanics, and also drafting it and soliciting discussions in public forums takes time. However, to your point, successful proposals attract more delegation and voting power over time, which speaks to the quality of your work. But the thing is, if this level of governance involves so much resource-intensive labor and experience, like, what do you think needs to shift right now so that DAOs treat governance as really professional work rather than something that relies on ad hoc contributions in a decentralized ecosystem where sometimes they do implement retro public good style funding where you put skin in the game first as a proposer, spend your time to craft proposals and ensure that it gets passed, hopefully with the right votes. And some people, they tend to burn out as delegates in this professional field because that's just a really long runway that requires for reputation, premium stability. I'm curious to know your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, blockchain aside, I believe that expertise is valuable and important for any sort of venture to succeed. So, it's not surprising that if in a platform like Uniswap or Aave or any of these sort of meaningfully big DeFi platforms, you have to work very hard to make something happen, right? I mean, go and change something in JP Morgan. Same, right? Yeah, it's also difficult. The documentation needs to be of a certain quality level. So in my mind, I interpret this as a kind of signal that this industry gets more mature because, well, the stakes are kind of high, right? Now these platforms facilitate billions of dollars of trading every day. Well, of course, you want very good proposals. And if somebody doesn't take it serious or doesn't have the expertise, well, then we don't really want their input, right? I think that's probably a positive development. At least that's how I interpret it.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing. That makes sense. And it stems from also that concentration of voting power, right? That sits with a small core of expert delegates. And then over time, that there's this dilemma within governance trilemma within DAOs, like, and they're aware of this, all these known knowns, right? Like the decentralization means distribution of power, but then you have to trade it off with participation, means the number of people that actively engages in governance, the more you have, the slower the decision making, and which leads to like efficiency, right? The speed of operations in practice. So if we try to increase decentralization and participation, efficiency drops. But then if you try to optimize for efficiency, then participation and power clusters drops. So given this tension and given this ongoing discussion about how do we increase delegate and client diversity, how do you think DAOs should do it in a meaningful and sustainable way?
I don't have a crystal ball, but I think one of the things that are probably, very important are to put products on the table that really matter. And I mean, there are many DAOs where I think it's very questionable value proposition, right? Governance aside, whatever their product is, maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense. So then, it's very hard. I mean, it's even harder to figure out how to deal with these governance dynamics than when you have a product that everyone wants, right? Because then immediately people go, okay, it's difficult, but it's worth it. So let's figure out a way on how to kind of optimize. So I think that would be the starting point. I mean, trilemmas, are all of them inherently difficult to solve, or you could even say unsolvable. Otherwise, they're not a trilemma anymore. So I don't have the answer of what to do. I do think that experimenting goes a long way. I mean, if you look at the sort of iterations of the synthetics protocol, for example, and how they experimented with governance, and then also, looked each other in the eye and said, okay, what we first did doesn't work. So let's do something else, right? And then I think, for example, they came up with this idea of sub-DAOs and kind of different committee levels to govern different parts of the ecosystem to speed things up, and then only certain decisions had to roll up and so on. So I think there's a whole bunch of experimentation that I think probably one can learn from. But also continuous experimentation is important, because there will always be new situations for a DAO that nobody else has figured out before. And then, I mean, to remain sort of agile and adaptable is probably important.
Yeah, actually, you've canvassed one of the questions I'm already going to ask about contract architecture, the continuous experimentation. No, it really makes sense. It really makes sense. And that's something that the space is still, in DAO governance is still dedicated to, and the governance teams are. I'm seeing with this experimentation, you do need talent. And I do see a growing talent pool of governance specialists growing, where DAOs are actually hiring governance leads full time. So it's actually quite a good signal, positive signal to see. And hopefully in the APAC region, we will have more talent pool as well, contributing to DAO governance. And and given this evolution, what research questions are you now most excited to dive into next?
Oh, they don't have anything to do with DAOs. Can I still share? I feel like I've got one article that sort of summarizes where the DAO literature stood at the time of writing. So that's published. Then we've got the book together with Sandy O, which I think it also was reasonably successful, and we now use even when we engage with the central banks and so on. So that's kind of cool. Fantastic. And then now we have that DeFi governance paper, and I feel like I need a little bit, I need to deviate a little bit and do something else. Not otherwise I'll just become the DAO guy, which is nice to be, but I also want to be other things. So some of the things that I find quite interesting are also to investigate a little bit more these automated market makers. I mean, I stand on the shoulders of all these academic giants who've already published their work in, Journal of Finance and all these other great journals. So my work is probably not quite there yet. But one thing that I've been thinking about recently very much is, are there network effects in these AMMs? And let me just explain briefly. So we know what a network effect is, right? So more begets more on either side of a two-sided market. And you see that on, I don't know, Uber and Airbnb and all these other kind of Web2 platforms. But what's different in a Web3 context, at least before the fee switch in Uniswap, is that the organizer of the market, as in the Uniswap protocol or people who own that, don't really get paid, right? So you have a zero rent sort of a situation, and yet, and I mean, if you look at traditional sort of market microstructure research, it would suggest that you need somebody to coordinate or somebody to organize the market. Otherwise, these two sides of the market don't come together. But then you have these AMMs where nobody gets paid to organize, and yet lots and lots of tokens change hands every single day. Right? So that's kind of one thing that I'm quite curious to investigate a little bit more. And you'll see something come out sometime soon. And then the other idea is all around whether how do you assess what drives or not the resilience in DeFi markets, right? So there's already some interesting work by, I think, Julian Pratt, who also contributed one chapter to the book, talks about contagion risk in DeFi lending and so on. But there's also something to be said about what Markus Brunnermeier, the Princeton professor, defined as resilience, right? How good are you as an ecosystem to bounce back from something back, and how quickly can you do that? So I think to investigate that is another thing that's now on my list, and that will take a little while because we just started looking into it. But yeah, that's what I work on as well.
No, that's really, really cool, actually. Like it is still part of the DeFi landscape, but I hear you're going into how flows are being facilitated by AMMs.
More about the market and the activity in the market rather than the organization of the DAO in that sense. Yeah.
Understood. Yes. So just for folks that are not DeFi natives, like when you speak about AMMs, are you referring to the smart contract that actually governs both the pools on the supply and demand side of a specific token pairing, like say USDC to Uni, for example?
Yeah, it's basically the smart contract that allows you to swap one token against the other, both of them having been contributed into a pool. A pool is basically just another smart contract that stores, if you like, two tokens in some sort of amount.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to deep dive into market resilience, because a lot of focus has been on security audits, but less so on, say, maybe even key management or like just like operational resilience, really. Yeah, so it'd be very, very cool to see what your research yields.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It will take a while. It's again,
Yeah.
if you want to do it properly, you need a lot of data, and so we have kind of identified or figured out a strategy on how to get it all. But then, if you want to process that data or analyze it, you need a lot of computing power. So we're figuring out a strategy around that. And then, of course, it's also about asking the right questions and how do you define things and so on. So yeah, should be an interesting project, but that will take a while. We just started thinking about it. The other one around the sort of excuse me, the other one around the network effects is something that will come out a lot sooner.
Okay, fantastic. I look forward to your research findings. So, second last question here. How do you imagine now DeFi governance evolving, right? When you have AI agents coming into the mix, since everyone's AI mad right now. And the way I think of it, I've only kind of started using AI to enable market research for DAOs for my own like consumption. So I do think there is a potential for AI agents to actually scan markets and read price trends and tie it to governance decisions. But I'm curious to know how you think about this space evolving. Yeah.
I am not a specialist at all when it comes to AI. And I think, not many people are. There are some people who are experts, but not many people are. So I'm more on the careful side about what to say because maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. But I do know somebody who did some work on this, actually. Unfortunately, not featured in the book. Maybe in the second volume, we'll come back to that. But there is a sort of draft paper by Agostino Caponi, who is a Columbia professor, and he is investigating whether large language model type agents cannot be used to read governance discussions on Snapshot and so on, and then also kind of predict a little bit the outcome of the vote. And I saw him briefly talk about it at a presentation in Durham University in Europe a few weeks ago, and I thought that is kind of one interesting real application because if you talk about can AI predict like a price or something like that, it's like in TradFi people have been doing similar things for a long time. It's not really so. Maybe you can make money with it, but it's not so interesting. But to understand or to use LLMs to understand language which you find on governance portals and then try to use that, and that I think is a more interesting angle. So maybe after I'll send you the link. You can also add it to the description of our conversation. Yeah, I think it's probably pretty new paper, so not published yet, but I think Agostino is doing kind of good job to investigate that.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic. It's something that I am tinkering on, but it's not it can definitely take up quite a bit of bandwidth. So limited time there. So then last question, since we're 8 minutes to time.
Okay.
Now, as a CIO, wearing your CIO hat as well, like what do you think CIOs should do, should be watching closely in terms of trends in blockchain technology over the next 3 to 5 years?
I think we already talked about some of it. I think this idea of privacy preservation, but then at the same time also marrying that with sort of compliance and making sure that there's some sort of regulatory interface with all of that. I think that is probably quite a big deal. And I'm going to say something very controversial, if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
Recently, Vitalik came out with this decentralization manifesto. I don't know whether you've seen that.
Not yet.
And kind of depicts a little bit now I'm worried that it's not called Decentralization Manifesto, but something else. But it's basically his latest manifesto, which I read and I thought, if I am a decision maker in a financial institution, do I really want to tokenize on a platform that is effectively run by a guy who wrote this thing? And you can see why I'm saying it's a little bit controversial, because right now, of course, lots and lots of tokenization experimentation is happening on Ethereum. But I think it's kind of worth it to think about whether I want to be associated with that, because some of these things are, not very much in line with how I think probably most large financial organizations look at the world. So this is not Daniel saying you shouldn't do it. This is Daniel saying, read that manifesto and think about it, and then, be conscious who you're engaging with, and so on. So I think that is maybe also an important thing. I can imagine that not all layer one groups around the world will look at this and sign it. Because obviously Vitalik went out and said, okay, everyone signed this thing because this is what we should do as an industry. I'm not even sure whether I'm so against what he says. Maybe I quite like some of the ideas that he outlines there. It's just when I read it, I thought, does that fit with TradFi or not? So that is maybe one important thing to think about it, because effectively, right, if you choose to tokenize on Ethereum, it becomes kind of a key part of your technology stack that you will be fairly dependent on once all of the securities are depicted there, right, or are stored there. So yeah, maybe that is number 2.
Yes.
Then I think number 3, and this is very difficult to do. Everything blockchain, including DAOs, was designed to survive or to kind of function in a world where rule of law is not present, right? Because you either don't know who you're dealing with, but then it doesn't matter because you have security guarantees and cryptographic proofs and so on. But then the world doesn't function that way, right? I mean, we have rule of law, and I think that's also a very good thing that we have rule of law. So how do you kind of bring these two things together? And is that even required? I mean, that's another big question, which I think we should all think about a lot.
Yeah, thanks for
These
sharing.
are the 3 things. I think lots of food for thought, I hope.
A lot of
not easy to answer, yeah. Not easy to answer, but yeah, hopefully useful.
Yeah, maybe I'll try to paraphrase. So top 3 threads: privacy preservation, and second one, the manifesto from the Ethereum ecosystem that Vitalik wrote, and the third one is how would DAOs actually interface, or rather, how would you reconcile the rule of law?
Is a good word, actually.
Yeah, because it's about enforcement, right? Like, and DAOs are more about stewardship, governance of the commons, this sort of thing. So how do you reconcile these kind of governance frameworks? And it ties back to the second point as well, because Ethereum is a public blockchain. It's permissionless. Anyone can like spin up pools and AMMs at will, provided they have the flows and liquidity. And it would be very interesting to see how institutions would react to that or respond to that. I mean, that there is a growing body of discussion or body of work around permissioned like chains, so to speak, with their own validator set, and that's KYC, and the counterparties are identified, and the consortium of FIs would find comfort with. But I mean, MAS did do some regulatory sandboxes around these sort of pilots.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how open governance models evolve with that.
We could probably have a whole 1 more hour to talk only about these sort of layer 1 topics, which I'm also very passionate about. But I think I'll just say one thing.
Yeah.
You can run a public blockchain and rely on cryptography more to be compliant. And so it's a bit of a misunderstanding that you have to have a private blockchain if you want to be compliant. So there's another thing, maybe like 3A, you can also investigate and understand that better, because I think is also important.
Okay, fantastic. So all of this will be on the show notes, and I'm glad to say we've ended on time. So
yay, very good.
Dan, thank you
Good job.
so much for your time. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and show notes will be available shortly and playback as well. Dan, thank you for the very insightful discussion. Yes, on all things strategic governance in DeFi. Okay, signing off. It's Katherine from Katashe Solutions. I'll see you in the next KatKast episode. Bye.
Bye-bye.